Boeing just made a move so shocking that it's left the entire world in disbelief. Imagine one of America's most iconic companies, responsible for building the jets that power global travel, deciding to shut down all U.S. production. That's right, Boeing is abandoning American soil. This isn't just a business decision, it's a seismic shift that could redefine the entire aviation industry. Thousands of jobs gone, communities left devastated, and a once untouchable manufacturing giant now fleeing the country. But why would Boeing do this? What forces pushed them to abandon their roots and risk their legacy? And how did one decision trigger a global power struggle that could change the future of air travel forever? What went wrong? Was it Trump's trade war that forced Boeing's hand? Can America ever reclaim its aerospace dominance? And will China and Europe now rule the skies? This move didn't just shake the industry, it changed everything. Trump's trade war backfires. When Donald Trump launched his trade war, he envisioned a revitalized American manufacturing sector, one that would thrive under his America First doctrine. The strategy was straightforward. Impose tariffs on key materials like steel and aluminum to protect domestic producers from foreign competition. By making imports more expensive, Trump aimed to level the playing field for American companies, allowing them to reclaim lost ground in global markets. But the reality turned out differently. Boeing, a company that had long epitomized American industrial strength, found itself ensnared in the very policies meant to protect it. The tariffs, instead of insulating U.S. manufacturers, pushed Boeing to a breaking point. Steel and aluminum are critical components in aircraft manufacturing, and with tariffs raising the cost of these materials by as much as 25%, Boeing's production expenses skyrocketed. The supply chain disruption went beyond just raw materials. Foreign partners, wary of ongoing trade disputes, started reconsidering long-term commitments. Boeing's intricate global supply network, which relied on efficient collaboration across multiple countries, began to fray. As parts became harder to source and costs mounted, the company's profitability came under serious threat. Inside Boeing, debates grew heated. Some executives argued for sticking it out and maintaining a patriotic stance, while others warned that doing so could bankrupt the company. In the end, pragmatism won out. Ortberg and his team concluded that relocating production abroad was the only viable option to maintain the company's global competitiveness. Politically, the fallout was swift. Trump, caught off guard, lashed out at Boeing, accusing the company of abandoning American workers. In public statements, he framed the move as corporate greed rather than a consequence of his own economic policies. However, critics from both sides of the aisle pointed out the irony. The tariffs that were supposed to bolster U.S. manufacturing had effectively driven one of the nation's industrial giants overseas. As protests continued at Boeing sites, workers expressed frustration, not only at Boeing's management, but at the government's economic policies as well. Signs reading, "Tariffs kill jobs," dotted the picket lines, and local politicians found themselves caught between supporting the president and defending their constituents' livelihoods. But Boeing wasn't the only one feeling the heat. China's response would make things even worse. China's tactical response. While the United States grappled with the fallout from Boeing's decision, China wasted no time capitalizing on the situation. The Chinese government, seeing an opportunity to strike back in the ongoing trade war, issued a directive to domestic airlines: halt all new orders of Boeing aircraft. Instead, Beijing encouraged airlines to look to Airbus and Comac for their fleet expansion. The economic impact on Boeing was immediate and severe. Losing long-term contracts with Chinese airlines meant billions of dollars in potential revenue vanished overnight. Analysts warned that this loss could cripple Boeing's commercial aviation division, as China had been one of its largest and most reliable markets. Chinese state media framed the development as a victory, emphasizing that America's economic policies had driven its own companies into turmoil. Articles praised Beijing's strategic foresight, presenting the crisis as proof that the United States was losing its competitive edge. But while China fought back, Boeing was already making plans to survive. Boeing's global pivot. Boeing didn't just retreat, it planned a global comeback. Faced with mounting pressure, Boeing pivoted its strategy from damage control to reinvention. The plan was clear: embrace globalization more aggressively than ever before. The company sought partnerships in countries with lower production costs and more favorable trade agreements. By moving key operations to emerging aerospace hubs in Asia and Europe, Boeing aimed to rebuild its supply chain in a way that minimized exposure to U.S. tariffs. This move sparked debate among investors. Some saw it as a necessary adaptation, while others feared it marked the end of Boeing's identity as a proud American manufacturer. Nevertheless, Ortberg remained steadfast, arguing that survival in the global market required making tough choices. Internally, the decision caused a cultural shift within Boeing. Engineers and production staff who remained felt alienated as the company's focus shifted from American pride to global competitiveness. Statements from executives framed the change as forward-thinking, but for many employees it felt like betrayal. But moving abroad was only the beginning. Boeing's actions would ripple across America. If this story has you rethinking the future of American manufacturing, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives like this. Economic collapse in Boeing-dependent cities. Boeing's sudden decision to close its U.S. factories sent shockwaves through the cities that had long relied on its presence. Communities like Seattle and St. Louis, which had thrived for decades due to Boeing's manufacturing and innovation hubs, found themselves on the brink of collapse. Factories that once bustled with activity were now eerily silent, and entire neighborhoods faced an uncertain future. The most immediate impact was mass unemployment. Overnight, thousands of workers lost their jobs, many of whom had dedicated decades to building aircraft and aerospace systems. The layoffs did not just affect Boeing employees. Contractors, suppliers, and ancillary workers also faced the grim reality of joblessness. In Seattle alone, local estimates suggest that over 50,000 people were directly or indirectly affected. The government's response was swift, but largely insufficient. Emergency meetings were held to discuss economic recovery plans. State officials debated whether to attract new industries or provide temporary support to displaced workers. Federal discussions centered around whether to implement recovery packages or let the market naturally adjust. However, proposals for retraining programs and infrastructure investments were met with political gridlock as policymakers struggled to balance federal spending with economic urgency. Amid the despair, community activism began to emerge. Local groups formed to advocate for economic justice and to hold both Boeing and local government accountable. Some groups demanded that Boeing provide severance packages and job placement assistance, while others called for increased government intervention to stabilize the local economy. In towns like Everett, grassroots initiatives focused on rebuilding the community through new business ventures, though the path ahead seemed daunting. Economic analysts warned that the long-term outlook was bleak. Models predicted a reduction in the local GDP by nearly 30% over the next 5 years if alternative industries were not introduced. The ripple effect was expected to last decades, leaving a permanent scar on the region's economic landscape. As communities struggled to adapt, the broader implications of Boeing's exit became clearer. But while cities crumbled, the blow to U.S. military strength was even more alarming. National security at risk. Boeing's role in the American defense sector cannot be overstated. As the nation's premier aerospace manufacturer, Boeing produced vital equipment, including fighter jets, surveillance satellites, and advanced missile systems. With production now moving overseas, the United States faced a crisis not just of manufacturing but of military readiness. The primary concern was the security of sensitive technologies. By shifting production abroad, Boeing inadvertently exposed critical defense projects to potential espionage and sabotage. Countries hosting Boeing's new facilities may not maintain the same cybersecurity protocols as U.S.-based plants. National security experts voiced fears that advanced fighter jet designs and satellite encryption systems could be compromised, leading to catastrophic vulnerabilities. The Pentagon responded with urgency. High-ranking officials expressed alarm over losing control of the supply chain. They called for new regulations to mandate that critical defense manufacturing remains within U.S. borders. Congressional hearings sought to understand why Boeing had been allowed to relocate despite its defense contracts, but answers were evasive. Technological security became a focal point of debate. Boeing's outsourced production raised the risk of compromised components. With countries like China increasingly involved in aerospace manufacturing, the possibility of malware in avionics or manipulated software in guidance systems was no longer far-fetched. Defense analysts argued that the long-standing policy of trusting large contractors without oversight was deeply flawed. Policy proposals emerged, advocating for a return of defense-critical components to U.S. factories. Politicians from both sides of the aisle pushed for stricter guidelines on aerospace production to ensure that national security would never again be compromised by corporate decisions. As new legislation was debated, the Pentagon began exploring partnerships with smaller domestic aerospace firms to rebuild a more resilient supply chain. And just as security risks mounted, corporate America started making new calculations. Corporate exodus begins. Boeing's relocation did not just shock the aerospace sector, it sent ripples throughout corporate America. Companies that relied on global supply chains began to reassess their manufacturing strategies. Executives in industries like automotive and electronics, already hit by tariffs, now faced mounting pressure to follow Boeing's example. Financial analysts warned that a wave of corporate relocation could cripple American industrial capacity. Companies like General Electric and Ford began openly discussing the feasibility of shifting production to countries with fewer economic barriers. Case studies highlighted how Harley-Davidson's earlier move abroad had already set a precedent. Governors scrambled to keep corporations within state lines, offering tax breaks and lobbying Congress for relief from tariffs. Meanwhile, countries like Vietnam and India openly courted American manufacturers, presenting themselves as low-cost, high-efficiency alternatives. Economic forecasters predicted a grim future if the corporate exodus continued. The concept of economic patriotism seemed increasingly hollow as profit margins took precedence over national loyalty. As industries rethink their future, America's economic foundation begins to shake. China's aerospace ambitions. When Boeing announced it was shutting down all production in the United States, China did not just watch from the sidelines. Instead, Beijing saw an unprecedented opportunity to take the lead in the global aerospace market. The Chinese government, known for its strategic and long-term economic planning, moved quickly to capitalize on Boeing's sudden exit from American soil. One of the first moves came from the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China, a state-backed aerospace manufacturer. Beijing immediately fast-tracked the production and development of its C919 jet, an ambitious project that had been in the pipeline for years. With Boeing's absence creating a gap in the market, COMAC's plans accelerated, gaining not just domestic support, but also heightened international interest. The C919, designed to compete directly with Boeing's narrow-body aircraft, became the centerpiece of China's strategy to replace Boeing jets in key markets. At the same time, China ramped up investment in domestic aviation technology. The government poured billions into research and development to ensure that the next generation of Chinese aircraft would not just match but potentially exceed the technological standards set by Boeing and Airbus. Part of this initiative involved reducing dependence on Western manufacturers for crucial components, such as avionics and composite materials. Chinese engineers were tasked with developing homegrown alternatives to critical parts traditionally imported from the United States and Europe. Beyond technological advancement, Beijing strategically pursued global partnerships to expand its aerospace influence. China signed significant deals with countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia for exclusive aircraft purchases, positioning COMAC as a viable and stable alternative to Boeing. These partnerships were not just about selling planes. They were about embedding Chinese technology into the aviation infrastructure of emerging economies. By using the Belt and Road Initiative, China linked aircraft sales with infrastructure development, making COMAC's planes an integral part of broader economic agreements. China also invested heavily in developing next-generation aircraft equipped with digital flight systems and enhanced fuel efficiency. The state-sponsored research focused on outperforming Airbus and Boeing, aiming to introduce features that would make COMAC jets not only more affordable, but also technologically superior. This strategy aimed to shift the narrative from China being an aerospace underdog to a leader in innovation. Politically, China framed Boeing's exit as a symbol of American industrial decline. Chinese state media portrayed the situation as evidence that the United States could no longer maintain its manufacturing dominance. This narrative was designed to strengthen China's image as a more economically stable and industrially resilient global power. By presenting itself as a reliable alternative during a time of U.S. instability, China aimed to cement its position as a leader in the 21st century aerospace race. But China was not the only one seizing the opportunity. Europe moved fast too. Airbus' golden opportunity. While China swiftly acted to fill the void left by Boeing, Airbus, Europe's aerospace giant, also recognized the immense potential to expand its influence. Airbus executives were reportedly taken aback by the news of Boeing's exit, but they did not waste any time. Production lines in Germany, France, and the United Kingdom ramped up to meet the anticipated demand surge. One of the most immediate moves involved securing contracts from former Boeing clients. Major airlines, including American Airlines and Delta, expressed interest in transitioning their future fleet acquisitions to Airbus models. With Boeing's stability now in question, Airbus positioned itself as the dependable Western alternative. This move was particularly strategic, as it not only retained existing customers, but also attracted airlines that had been on the fence about their next large purchase. Financially, the situation played out brilliantly for Airbus. As Boeing's stocks took a hit, Airbus shares surged, reflecting investor confidence in the company's ability to dominate the global market. The European Union offered further support by announcing subsidies and tax breaks to boost Airbus production. This was a clear political statement that Europe was ready to support its champion in the aerospace race. Strategically, Airbus made a decisive push to strengthen ties with Asian and Middle Eastern airlines, regions where Boeing had traditionally held a strong presence. Airbus representatives traveled to key hubs in Dubai, Singapore, and Beijing, negotiating deals that would lock in long-term supply agreements. The company also committed to expanding its maintenance and service networks in these regions, offering comprehensive support that matched or exceeded Boeing's previous commitments. Airbus's new narrative was simple yet effective. It framed itself as the reliable, technologically advanced, and politically stable option. By emphasizing its commitment to keeping production within Europe, Airbus appealed not only to customers, but also to policymakers, who favored maintaining aerospace jobs within the EU. While Airbus soared, the U.S. industrial landscape faced a grim new reality: the death of U.S. industrial dominance. Boeing's decision to relocate production abroad did not just affect the aerospace sector. It symbolized the broader decline of U.S. industrial power. For decades, America's manufacturing prowess was a core element of its economic identity. Boeing's exit, however, signaled a deeper, more systemic problem, one where high-tech industries were increasingly moving out of the country. The immediate economic fallout was profound. Innovation hubs like Seattle and St. Louis faced a dramatic shift. Once vibrant with aerospace research and skilled labor, these cities began to experience a brain drain as engineers and specialists moved abroad for better job security. Universities that had tailored their programs to feed Boeing's workforce suddenly found themselves without recruitment pipelines, leading to budget cuts and program reductions. Economists noted that Boeing's move could set a precedent, accelerating the offshoring of high-tech manufacturing to cheaper, more politically stable regions. This was not just about jobs, but about losing core industrial capabilities that had long defined American ingenuity. The loss of talent was another key issue. With Boeing's relocation, many aerospace engineers saw no choice but to follow the work to new international hubs. This movement threatened to erode the technical base that had kept American aerospace globally competitive. As skilled workers left, smaller companies and suppliers found it increasingly difficult to maintain operations. Culturally, the blow was even more profound. Manufacturing towns that had thrived because of Boeing were now facing an uncertain future. The American identity as a manufacturing powerhouse was crumbling, and the shift from pride in industrial might to despair over economic decline was palpable. Cities that once celebrated the rollout of Boeing jets now felt abandoned, turning into ghost towns almost overnight. But just when it seemed America was down for good, a new worker movement took shape. The new worker movement. With Boeing gone, many American workers felt betrayed. But instead of succumbing to despair, grassroots labor movements began to emerge. Unions, long seen as losing influence, suddenly found a new sense of purpose. Workers from various industries began rallying for corporate accountability, demanding that companies prioritizing profits over patriotism should face consequences. In places where Boeing factories had closed, former employees began forming worker cooperatives, pooling skills and resources to create smaller aerospace ventures. Some state governments offered grants and subsidies to these local initiatives, hoping to rebuild the shattered economic landscape. Community resilience became a rallying cry. Workers advocated for economic patriotism, emphasizing that U.S. industries should not abandon their roots. Labor leaders organized workshops to teach displaced workers how to transition to new aerospace roles, emphasizing innovation and local ownership. Just when you think it can't get worse, Boeing's gamble abroad is just beginning. Boeing's global gamble. Boeing's decision to move production abroad was not just a reactive measure. It was a calculated and high-stakes gamble. In the short term, the move appeared advantageous. By shifting manufacturing to countries with lower production costs and fewer trade restrictions, Boeing aimed to cut expenses significantly. The immediate benefits were clear: cheaper labor, reduced tariffs, and streamlined logistics in regions more welcoming to multinational enterprises. Shareholders saw these changes as promising signs, leading to a quick rebound in Boeing's stock price. Financial analysts praised the company's decisive action to secure its bottom line amid economic uncertainty. However, as the dust settled, the long-term risks began to surface. One of the most significant challenges Boeing now faces is navigating the political climates of its new host countries. What if these nations, eager to attract foreign investment, later impose stricter regulations or higher taxes? Geopolitical instability also looms as a serious threat. Moving production abroad makes Boeing's supply chains more vulnerable to international conflicts, trade disputes, and regional unrest. Any disruption could drastically impact Boeing's ability to meet production targets and maintain profitability. Additionally, moving overseas risks diluting Boeing's corporate culture, which has long been built on rigorous quality standards. American workers at Boeing were known for their commitment to safety and precision, values that might not easily transfer to a workforce with different cultural norms and industrial practices. There are growing concerns about whether production quality will suffer, especially when new employees abroad may not meet the standards set by Boeing's veteran engineers. Maintaining consistency across diverse international facilities will be an ongoing challenge. Perception is another issue. Boeing, once seen as a paragon of American engineering excellence, now faces a potential identity crisis. Media coverage has portrayed the company as a corporate opportunist, willing to abandon its roots to protect profits. This perception could erode customer loyalty, especially among U.S. government clients and patriotic consumers. Furthermore, the long-term financial sustainability of Boeing's decision remains in question. Lower costs today might lead to significant expenses tomorrow if production issues result in quality control failures. One major recall could offset all the financial gains achieved through relocation. And as Boeing braces for future challenges, the United States looks to rebuild its aerospace legacy. Rebuilding American aerospace. The departure of Boeing from American soil marked more than just a corporate shift. It was a wake-up call for the nation's aerospace industry. Almost immediately, federal and state governments began devising strategies to fill the void left by the aviation giant. One of the first responses came in the form of increased funding for aerospace startups. The idea was to cultivate a new generation of companies that could innovate without the constraints that had burdened Boeing. By promoting small and mid-sized firms, policymakers hoped to create a more resilient and diverse aerospace sector. State governments also moved swiftly, introducing tax incentives designed to attract new aerospace ventures. The focus shifted from relying on one dominant player to fostering a network of smaller manufacturers. This approach, advocates argued, would not only replace lost jobs, but also make the industry less susceptible to single-point failures like Boeing's abrupt exit. Additionally, federal agencies such as NASA and the Department of Defense began seeking partnerships with emerging aerospace companies, emphasizing domestic production to secure critical defense technologies. Educational institutions responded as well. Universities and technical schools in aerospace hubs reinvested in STEM education, designing curricula aimed at training a new workforce capable of maintaining the United States' leadership in aviation. Vocational programs focused on reskilling former Boeing employees, offering courses in advanced manufacturing, avionics, and aerospace engineering. The goal was to ensure that American talent remained competitive on the global stage. Communities that had depended on Boeing also took proactive steps. Local governments worked to transform former Boeing facilities into innovation hubs, attracting startups and tech companies to reinvigorate the economic landscape. Worker cooperatives emerged, driven by employees who wanted to preserve their skills and livelihoods. These cooperatives focused on smaller-scale aircraft component production, keeping at least some aerospace capabilities in local hands. Industry leaders also called for a Made in America aerospace initiative, emphasizing the need to keep critical manufacturing within U.S. borders. Public-private collaborations flourished as technology firms partnered with aerospace startups to develop new materials and efficient production methods. Though the path to recovery was complex and fraught with uncertainty, there was a sense of determination to prove that the American aerospace industry could survive without its most iconic company. But as new companies rise, the global balance of power continues to shift. The global aviation power shift. Boeing's exit from the United States did not just impact domestic manufacturing, it set off a profound transformation in global aviation dynamics. The most immediate beneficiaries of this shift were China's Comac and Europe's Airbus. With Boeing no longer firmly rooted in the United States, these competitors quickly capitalized on the uncertainty. Comac, backed by state investments, expanded its production capacity, targeting emerging markets and offering competitive pricing that Boeing now struggled to match. Airbus, already a formidable rival, took advantage of the situation by ramping up production and securing new contracts. European governments rallied behind Airbus, providing financial support to ensure that it could meet the surge in demand. The narrative in global media shifted, portraying Airbus as a stable and reliable alternative to the increasingly fragmented Boeing. As global airlines reevaluated their procurement strategies, countries that once depended on Boeing jets began diversifying. Nations that valued stability and consistency in production leaned more towards European and Chinese manufacturers. The global aviation landscape was realigning, and the United States was losing its traditional foothold. Beyond commercial aviation, defense contracts also saw shifts. Military allies of the United States questioned the reliability of Boeing's production commitments. European defense firms saw an opening to pitch their aircraft as reliable alternatives, further weakening Boeing's influence. The ripple effects of Boeing's decision have only just begun, and the true impact may take decades to unravel. If you found this analysis eye-opening, make sure to like and subscribe. We're keeping a close watch on how this story unfolds, and your support helps us keep digging for the truth behind these corporate decisions.